Hello, welcome. Apologies for the problems we've had with the password. Everybody's had problems with the password, Bettina, so you're not alone. Um, but thank you for persevering. Oh, Penny would be interested to know about
Right.
Viome frogs.
Bows with beyond frogs. Right, right. Oh, you know what? Because that's a special question, so I'll just start with that.
Yeah.
All right. So
Okay.
the Viome frog. Um, when you look at wooden bows, especially when they get older, you often notice that the frog starts wobbling on the stick. And the thing is, we have two simple facets here, and same on the frog. And when a wooden bow gets a little older, they start to wear for two reasons. One is a mechanical stress, and the other is sweat. And the sweat can eat away the wood and also some metal, but mostly the wood. And so Viome had the idea of giving it a shape where um, it cannot wobble because it's got a. Let me just sketch that up real quickly. Basically, something like this, where you have these surfaces to stop the frog from moving. So this just sit tight. So here's a frog and the stick and the screw, the bore is here. Now, with carbon fiber, we obviously don't have that problem. The material is much more resistant against wear and totally immune against sweat and tears and blood. So, you know, about 20-year-old or 22, 23-year-old Arcus bows now. And when we get them for repair, the frog fits like on the first day. So there's no change at all. So would we bother making this difficult shape that's a lot more expensive to manufacture when we don't have the problem? So that's why we don't. And also turns out on wooden bows, the Viome frog is not really that much more durable. And when it wears out, it's really tricky to repair. So it's a bit double-edged. All right. Does that satisfy your question, hopefully?
Great. I think that was very clear, says me, as I was
Okay.
trying to email a
Excellent.
million people as well. And Penny's
All right.
happy. So that's great. Okay, great. Well, look, I apologize to everybody who's here. We've got 13 attendees now. We are recording this, so we will edit the opening, and I will add now an apology for those of you who may be watching this at a later date because you couldn't get on to the live one because of problems with the password. I don't at the moment know why there were problems with the password, but I've changed it to the original one. So hopefully some more people will come along as we go along with the original passcode. But in the meantime, for those of us that are here, Bernd is fantastically knowledgeable about bows, and he is going to basically tell us all about how bows work and how we understand them, and is very happy to answer your questions. So any questions can go into the chat or to the Q&A, which I will keep an eye on, and we will try to answer everybody's questions as we go through. In the meantime, I am going to hand over to Bernd. I'm going to mute myself, and in the background, I'm going to be frantically sending out emails to try and get more people to be able to join us live. But as I say, we are recording, so the recording will go up on the ESTA website. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Bernd for his patience with these technical issues. And I'm sure we're going to have a very interesting time now hearing all about bows. Over to you, Bernd.
All right. Thank you very much, Steve, for the introduction. And well, indeed, it may quite be so that I know a little bit about bows. I mean, doing research and development for like 27 years now. Should have given me some insight if all goes right. Okay, now I'm thinking maybe we should start with a little bit of history. And I would like to approach this history from multiple perspectives. One is that we won't start with bows, but with strings. And here, let me start with a little bit of an anecdote. If there's players amongst you, maybe you have at some point played Mahler's Third Symphony, for example, where you find noted in the violin section, for example, some stuff to be played on the G string. And then you play it on the G string or you play it on the D string and it sounds the same. So you wonder, why would he make things difficult? Just to give us pain or what? To give us grief, us as players? There must be something else behind it, right? I mean, Mahler was not a complete idiot. Maybe he was a little weird, but he had some pretty clear ideas. Now, that symphony, I think, was published in 1902 or something like that. And that was the time when round wire wound G strings became really popular. I mean, like everybody was using those, every orchestra player. Up until that time, everybody was playing on pure gut strings. So we're talking about 1900. We're not talking about 17 or 1800, 1900. Which means that not only in the Baroque era, but in the classical music times and also in the Romantic times, everybody was playing on pure gut strings. That was the thing, from G to E, on all instruments. What changed during the 19th century was industrialization, and metals like copper became much cheaper. When, in 1800, copper would mostly be used for coins because it was so expensive, like silver and gold. Nowadays we wrap strings in silver. Now consider that. 200 years ago, people would have thought you're crazy. That would be a fortune for a string, more worth than the whole violin. So no way to do that. Now, what happened is that electrification was going on like crazy, and they were producing copper cables in huge quantities, like never before in history. And this exact same stuff, wires for electricity, they wrapped around strings and got heavier, more powerful strings. Now, a round string makes a pretty harsh sound, and especially when you play it in the upper positions. And that's what Mahler wanted. He wanted a noisy sound. I mean, you hear that in Mahler's compositions again and again, that he wants some noise, right? And that's what he wanted and got. Now, when we play on a beautiful modern string, we play high up on the G string, it sounds perfectly pure and clear. So that's exactly not what Mahler was asking for. All right, so what does it tell us about bows? It tells us that all those famous bow makers we hold in high esteem, for good reason. They have made the bows for gut strings. They have not made the bows for metal wound strings. Not copper, not silver, nor aluminum, no steel wire or whatever. Steel did not exist until about 1860, 1870, in only for extremely expensive swords. They were producing some kind of steel. But even that steel wasn't good enough to make thin wires from, like for an E string. They would break all the time. They would last like a minute. You couldn't tune it up. So pure steel, like it would be suitable for an E string, was invented, for example, for piano strings. So the grand piano was also coming up in those years only. So the grand piano was invented in, like, what was it, 1860, 1870? A steel wire, copper wound, that was the thing. So wooden bows are designed for gut strings. And that's exactly their strength. I mean, when you play on a violin with, or cello with pure gut strings, wooden bows are perfectly suitable. Now, why would you go for metal wound strings or metal rope core strings on a cello, for example? Why would you do that? Because you can play more powerful. But why would you want to play more powerful? Because in the year 1900, compared to the year, say, 1800, concert halls had manifolded in size. In 1800, it was courts. I mean, it was concert halls for what, 20 people? 100 max? 150 would be gigantic. And now in the year 1900, we see concert halls that hold like 1,000 or even 2,000 people. Now, with a little Baroque violin with pure gut strings, try to make a big noise for that. So this is one of the reasons why the orchestras were growing so enormous. But string players just needed more power. And you had all the brass sections and the flutes and the big drums, and everybody was making a noise. And we poor string players, we were, yeah, you get it. So, metal wound strings, that was the thing. And they could be pushed hard. And the E string, steel E string came along. And then more and more strings were developed that you can play much more powerful. With the result that from that day on, everybody was playing on the stick in fortissimo. Now, why wouldn't you make a stronger bow? Shouldn't be too difficult, right? Actually, it is. Pernambuco is the wood that has the highest strength to weight ratio. So it's the strongest material for a given weight. And it beats even steel, aluminum, titanium, any other metal. So it's no material known of until the end of the 20th century to be lighter and stronger than Pernambuco. Now let's look at some other story. Now let me share oh, wait a minute. What is that? This is, I need to go here, here, and here. So let me see. Where is it? Here. Guess what that is? That's a Pernambuco tree. Guess how old it is? This one's about 1,500 years old. 1,500 years old. So that's, when the Roman Empire came to a close, that's when this tree started growing. And this is a tree that gives fantastic wood for bows. But there's a little bit of a problem. This tree grows only in what we call the Mata Atlantica. The Mata Atlantica is a rainforest. Well, yeah, kind of, but it's not the Atlantic rainforest. It's in Brazil, but it's not the Amazonas rainforest. It is something different. And you can see on the left page here, all that is dark green. That was called the Mata Atlantica. And in the 16th century, it was huge. I don't know, the territory was combined as large as, I don't know, Germany and France put together, or I don't know, and England on top of it, whatever. Now, if you look to the right side of it, you see very little dark green, right? Yeah, that's what the Mata Atlantica is today. This is a more scientific map. You see the light green and the dark green, same color logic, and you see it's very little left. It's like 5, 6, 7%. So the forest is gone, and so are most of the trees, and they are put on the sites regulation in 2007. So it can't. They are not allowed to be felled. They still are illegally harvested, poached, but it's now more and more punished, and the American Fish and Wildlife and the Brazilian authorities are behind those poachers, and so there's an end to it. And people know that. I mean, bow makers who wanted to know knew this for a long time, which is why, so let me stop this, which is why there were carbon fiber bows made. For example, I have here, maybe this is the earliest one ever, Arc Verona. It's made in 1990 or something. This is a very early Coda bow. This is a John Paul bow, which is a follow-up of the Spiccato bow. They also started making bows. They all started making bows in the 1990s. And there's also Glasser, of course, in the US. And so they knew Pernambuco would come to an end sooner or later. The best quality Pernambuco wasn't available anyways. So the last guy who probably had the real nice, high quality Pernambuco bow in quantity was probably Sartori. After that, you see that bow makers use the kind of wood that Todd would never have touched. So it's not about the skill of the makers really, why the old French bows are so important, but it's the quality of the wood. So simple as that. Now, but that was not my idea. I was an amateur player to begin with, and also an engineer. Pretty bad combination. When I started looking to, for a new bow, I wanted a bow that was stronger. I always hated it when I was playing on the stick, and when I felt, when you bounce on the stick and you bounce and falter and you touch down all the time, it's you lose control. It's not a nice sound, and then I did something really stupid. I tried to understand bows. I thought that should be quite easy. If you look at a bicycle, I was designing bicycles, with disc brakes and suspension systems and aluminum frames, in a million parts on it, and derailleurs and whatnot. And then you look at this stupid little thing called a bow and you think, what the heck can be so difficult about that? Oh God, was I wrong. So, initially it was pretty easy, relatively easy, because I just started measuring up the forces that you have to apply to not bottom out. But then, the difficulties are already there. On the G string, forces are different from the D or the A or the E. And the position is different. Look at that. This is not the same as this. And if you play at the tip or at the heel, again, it's very different. You have completely different equations to solve. And as you play everywhere, they're like endless. So coming to some easy solutions for what is a perfect bow is pretty much impossible. So you have to look at it from a different way. I figured, wait a minute, this is not working. So, but there was like 200 years of evolution that I could use from Tour on. So what I did is I measured up lots and lots of wooden bows, you know, checked out the curve and the graduations, like the stick is thicker here and thinner at the front, and then put that in relation. And I thought this would give me a pretty clear clue about how a perfect bow must be built. Nah, because that's all over the place. Every bow maker does it in a different way because, again, it's not been calculated. It's been, trial and error, which works, which doesn't. And then, every piece of wood has some issues. So you leave a little more wood here because it looks a little bit weak, or it has a little bit of a knot here. So, and then I tried to wrap my head around it and come up with the design, and I did. And I thought, okay, now let's make it. Oh yeah, carbon fiber. I need to talk about carbon fiber. There were carbon fiber bows out there. Not the one that I wanted though. Let me show me what I was thinking about. Let me show that other screen here. Yeah. All right, you see this? When I was like 18, I believe, I got my pilot license for gliders. So I was a pilot for a couple of years, and those were the planes of our dreams. I mean, those huge things. You see these sleek wings, endlessly long. These things fly like a dream. No motor, and you can still go, when with good weather permitting, a whole day. I mean, you're just up in the air and you go and go and go. It's fantastic. These are made from carbon fiber, of course. And they were made from carbon fiber since the late 70s, I believe. So I was a little bit familiar, and also in the bicycle industry, a lot of carbon fiber is used. Like, everywhere. The wheels, the frame, the handlebar, everything. And also early wind turbines were made from carbon fiber. So I knew this material has a lot of potential. Like, for example, you can make a car from carbon fiber. Or this kind of car, where you can crash with 200 kilometers per hour in a wall and just get out and, do the next race. A couple of years earlier, people were sitting in aluminum cars and would be dead, right? Not when this thing is made from carbon fiber. It would, you would survive almost everything. And nowadays, planes are made more or less completely. I mean, the big things, it's like a Boeing, no, it's the Airbus A350. This is a Boeing 787. So all this black stuff is actually carbon fiber. So you've probably been on a carbon fiber plane already. So, okay. So I knew this material has huge potential. So I put my figures together and designed a stick and tried to make a stick that would do exactly what I wanted. And that's like 27 years ago now, and I had figured out a way, to make a stick that would be just as strong as I wanted it. And then all the learning really only began about how to actually produce these things, which was quite a task, and then how to make them. And then I found, when you're making wooden bows, you cannot really do too much if you want to make a good bow. All you can do is get the best out of the piece of wood that you've got. So you get a slightly denser, heavier wood. It'll be a slightly heavier bow, or a slimmer one. Either way, but you cannot design the properties that you might want. You just have them. Now with carbon fiber, it's exactly the other way around. You first have to decide what you want. Which weight do you want the bow to be? How strong do you want to be? And you also have to determine the curve and the camber and the graduation before you make a mold. So you better get it right. If you get it wrong, all the bows you'll ever produce will be wrong or will have issues or problems. Or you build a new mold, that's another 20 quid. Yeah. So no, what you want to do is make a bow that works for everybody, sounds great for every instrument, and then you find out that's not possible. Great. So we started production in 1999 with the idea to make a bow. You know, that was my bicycle and plane thinking, you know, lighter, stronger, faster, you know, more sporty. And it worked out. I mean, yeah, our first bows were really light and strong and fast and nimble and everything. And they sounded quite well. But a lot of people didn't like them. And it took me a long while to figure out what was wrong. So, where shall we begin? How about balance? I had no really idea about balance in the beginning. Balance is this. So, where, at what point between the heel and the tip is a center of gravity. That's the center of gravity. But it's not all. You can have two bows with exactly the same balance, center of gravity, but are otherwise completely different. Different weight and different mass distribution. Which again I found out later to be very important. Look, for example, at these two bows here. I'll show you. Okay. So you see here, that's a full-sized frog, standard size, with a heavy metal heel. And this is a frog that I designed in 2001, I believe. That's got all the excess wood cut away. I pretty much, you know, cut away what I could because our bows were kind of like heel heavy because the sticks were lighter, but we were putting on standard frogs. So the balance point was about 23 centimeters from the end. And that did not suit a lot of players. And I found in wooden bows, they're often like 25, the balance point. And I didn't know about the importance of that initially. I learned. So we designed this kind of frog to put them on our sticks, and then the balance was about right. Not too bad. Now, the next thing is I noticed is that not for every instrument did these bows really work well for the sound. There were a lot of instruments with these bows, they sound like kind of shallow, flat, sharp, whatever. And it took me like almost like 8 years to figure out what the reason for that was. Because you find that nowhere in the literature, nobody ever explained it or understood it. It's about the tuning of the bow. So every bow has its own its own distinct tone. And you can test that when you hold it gently, like here, 2 fingers, and tap it. I'm sorry. Just a second. And the tone that you get is about 50 hertz. That's about a C. No, a G, sorry. 50 hertz is a G. So, and now if you have a bow that's cut from slightly lighter wood, you will notice that it gives a more brilliant, a brighter sound. Though the tuning may be only a quarter note up or something. So instead of 50, it's going to 51, 52 hertz. Or you have a very dense bow, or cut also a little thinner, which makes it softer, and it will sound a lot warmer and darker. And so I started to play around with weight, and this I came back to the traditional kind of frog, so that was adding weight, and we also put some extra weight in the tip. So we have these metal tip plates, right? And these can be thicker or thinner. So we just put in, as you can see, this got a pretty thick tip plate. And silver is really heavy. So we put in a little bit thicker tip plate, for example, and a heavier frog. So we added quite a bit of weight on both ends. And we also added some material in the stick to add some weight. And by adding like 4 grams, we changed the tuning by roughly half a tone. And that has a huge impact on the sound. Now, when you have a brilliant sounding instrument, you better go for one of these heavier, warmer sounding bows. You get a warm sounding instrument, you do the opposite. So it's like crosswise. You know the same, it's exactly the same game with strings. You have a bright sounding violin, you put on obligato strings or vision solo, dark sounding strings. You have a dark sounding instrument, you put on if a Perazzi green or vision or a PI, whatever, bright sounding strings to balance it out. And exactly the same is true with bows. I held a lecture at the Violin Society of America, I believe in 2009 or 10, where I explained this to all the violin makers in the room. They were completely shell-shocked. They had no clue. They had no idea. And I demonstrated it on a dark and bright sounding violin. It got perfectly clear for them. They never thought about it. They thought they have to do all the sound adjustments in the instrument. But yeah, hey, we can balance stuff out with bows. But this changes also something else. By adding weight in the rear and in the front, we change the mass distribution. It means, though the center of gravity is the same, we have more mass at the extremes on this bow. Which means, like when we have string crossings, this slows down the bow a little bit. Or you can say it adds stability. So some players prefer a little more steadiness, a little more stability, and others just love the agility of the lightweight bow with the lighter ends. So we can actually make bows that are identical in weight, in balance, in the sound, in the feel, in the elasticity. Everything's the same. But still we have a different mass distribution, and it changes the handling completely. I mean, completely, yeah, it's still a bow. But yeah, in a big way. So over the years, I discovered more and more stuff like that, where you can actually play around with a material like carbon fiber, because you can simply engineer what you want to do. You don't have to live off what you have on the rack, the wood that you once purchased or you inherited from your grandfather, but you can just make it. And yeah, that led then to an explosion in our product range. I mean, everybody who has ever looked at our website and discovered how many different models we make might think they must be completely nuts. Yeah, we kind of, yeah, I admit. But to have the perfect bow for every player, yeah, it needs this variety, stiffer and softer bows, of more brilliant and darker sounds and whatnot. Oh, here's another thing I discovered. That was also very interesting. I'll show you some nice little thing here inside. I don't know. Yes, you can see that serial number there, and there's a little 8 engraved. And the 8 says you have to put on 8 square millimeters of hair on your bow to give it the ideal playing properties. I've actually found a formula how to calculate that, which I'm not giving away for free, but it has to do with the curve of the bow and the rigidity, so the elasticity of the stick, the flexibility of the stick. And this can be put in a formula when you measure that properly, and you can easily determine the ideal amount of hair. You know what? I can show you that. Hold a second.
Well, Bernd's still off doing that. Just let me remind everybody that you're very welcome to ask questions in the Q&A window or in the chat window. Bernd would love to have some questions.
Yes.
I've got a couple to ask you. This is fascinating, though. I mean, I've never even thought about square. What was it? Square millimeters.
Square millimeters. Yeah.
There. That is a new concept entirely.
So we've developed a little thingy here, and we call that a hair gauge, right? With 3 different slots. And what you can do is you can use it to exactly measure the amount of hair that you have on a bow. And we all, of course, we use it for production and everywhere. That's the tool we probably use most. And we also sell it to violin shops around the world. And by having exactly the right amount of hair on the bow, what you get is the bow bounces easily, but also stays put. You don't want it to bounce. And that's a very narrow margin. And as I said, we can determine that for any wood bow, basically, because we have that formula. And right, and we of course we do that with every one of our bows, and we do make bows with quite a bit of a variation in the elasticity. Like this P-series bows, they all have these 8 square millimeter of hair, and then we have. Does that?
Right. Got a couple of questions for you here, Bernd. Janet's asking what your website is, because I think probably a lot of people would like to have a look at the range of bows and so on. So I don't know if you want to type that into the chat at some point.
So the Herdem gauge.
Oh, and yes, and then there's a question about the Herdem gauge as well.
Right. The Herdem gauge is junk. Throw it away. Just throw it away. It doesn't even say a dimension. We used those in the very early years, and every Herdem gauge is different from the next one. So that really they're all over the place, and it doesn't even say square millimeters or anything. They're just some dots and lines, whatever. Now, don't use it. Get yourself one of these. Just let us know where you are, and we'll be happy. I mean, they don't cost a fortune, and they're really worth it. And they give you a very clean indication of where you really are. And we make these 3 different slots, because when you make a bass bow rehair or violin bow rehair, the thickness is so different that you need different scales. You can't do it with this one slot that the Herdem offers. It is no. And then it's so flexible that you can, every guy in the workshop who uses that Herdem gets a different reading. So yeah, the idea was correct, but yeah, it got us here. This is also, by the way, our 3rd edition of the hair gauge. So we keep developing this thing. All right. Okay.
I've popped the website address into the chat there for people, Bernd. You can just confirm that that's the correct address.
Right. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
our
right,
homepage. Yeah.
right.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. So where were we? Mass distribution and stuff. I've prepared something else for you that you might find very interesting. I want to show you some carbon fiber stuff, some actual carbon fiber stuff. And that is here.
I guess while you're finding that, one of the interesting things to me is the fact that when you try bows, once you're talking about all these different things, probably anybody that's tried bows in a shop is going to have a similar experience of trying heavier and lighter and whatever, but they probably didn't know what it was they were that was changing, and the mass
Right.
distribution, for instance. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. With wooden bows, that's what I found very, very early on, is they are all over the place. And it's so difficult to find any principles when you just look at wooden bows, because as a material is varying so much, and as makers are varying their craft and their use of tools and everything by so much, that it's really almost impossible to find any rules. So all you can do is try as many bows as you can get hold of, and then use the one that you like. Now, okay, let's look at some carbon fiber stuff here for a change, to entertain you a little bit. So, what is carbon fiber? It's basically carbon, like in a diamond or in coal or in graphite. It's just pure carbon. That's an element. It's the smallest element with 4 bindings. Means it can hold tight to 4 other atoms, right? To make huge molecules, which is why all our biology is based on carbon. Proteins, fat, sugars, everything's chains of carbon, holding tight to a lot of other stuff. And that's also why the diamond is the hardest and strongest stuff that can be. There's nothing beyond it. It's the smallest atom with 4 bindings, and that's the maximum you can get. So whenever you read something about some fantastic materials in a science fiction or whatever, that's harder and stronger than diamond, right, that's magic then. Okay, now carbon fiber is something like a drawn out diamond or whatever. So what happens is you start off with a pan fiber, PAN, polyacrylic nitrile, polyacrylics, like from sweaters, for example, any kind of clothing. And that fiber is stretched and then, well, thermoset, carbonized, graphitized. What happens is that it's got heated under a protective atmosphere. So everything that's not carbon is pyrolyzed, is really thrown out. And you repeat that and make a surface treatment and all that. And what happens is you can see it here. You start off at the left side with some complex polyacryl nitriles, and then you burn it down, and it becomes a pretty simple, sleek carbon structure, relatively simple. And if you look at it under a microscope, electron microscope, it's these, you can see these graphite, huge graphite structures, like leaves or whatever, folded up like crazy. Yes, fantastic fibers. These are also funny. It almost looks like some animals. Um, on the left side, you see a broken carbon fiber piece, where you can see those carbon fibers when they shed off. They reveal their inner layers and structures. So this is fantastic stuff. Also here, and again here. So it's pretty crazy stuff. So okay, got that. All right. Okay. So everybody seen that?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's interesting. Actually, it would be nice to put that side by side with the same magnification of Pernambuco, I think.
Right. I mean, yeah, wood has fantastic structures, molecular. Um, what I want to show you here is that it's not a simple material. Like, for example, metals, which are pretty much, or plastic, which are pretty much homogeneous. But carbon fiber has a very, very complex structure. And now I would like to show you some very interesting. Let me see, where are we here? I need to show you another. Here it is. Okay. So I want to show you the properties of carbon fiber, carbon fiber reinforced plastics. On the left top corner, you see CFRP, carbon fiber reinforced plastic. Do you see the hand?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. All right. Now, what are we getting here? The Young modulus is the stiffness, so which means the elasticity or the resistance that any material has against elastic deformation. So the springiness, if you want. And on the x-axis here, you have the loss coefficient. Loss coefficient means pretty much damping. Oh, yeah, and I need to explain damping a little bit. I'll do that afterwards. So, and of course, on any musical instrument, what you want is less damping. You want to put less energy in and more energy out. Like on a trumpet, you have a very efficient instrument. Like 90% of the energy you put in a trumpet or in a flute comes out as sound. In a violin, it's the other way around. It's only like 10 or 15% of all the muscle we put in a string instrument comes out as sound. The rest we produce is heat. Now, when we have a bow that's more efficient, it'll improve it. And you can play more loud and also more silent, by the way, because it's more efficient. And on this graph, you see CFRP for violin bows. That's the gray area here. That's where I started, like with Kodabo, Spiccato, and all these guys. They were doing CFRPs like these. Here, you can see Pernambuco, and you can see that Pernambuco has less damping and a higher Young modulus, so it's different. So this carbon fiber stuff is actually pretty poor. And why is that? That's because there's carbon fiber reinforced plastics. Reinforced plastics. Plastics means it's basically mostly epoxy, and it's only reinforced with carbon fiber. So when you hold a Kodabow bow in your hands, the stick is actually made from about 60% plastic and only 40% is carbon fiber. So if you want to be precise, or Chinese stick or John Paul bow or whatever, they're all the same. So you actually have a plastic bow. Why does everybody say it's a carbon fiber bow? It's not exactly correct. But if you look at the left-hand corner up there, you see that's completely different numbers. It's much stiffer and much less damping than pretty much any other wood. I mean, metal has even less damping, but it's not as strong, or it's much heavier. So what's the difference? That is material with 70% or 75% of carbon fibers, and like 25 or 30% epoxy, and that changes the game entirely because plastic has, of course, a lot of damping, while carbon fiber has almost none. So the percentage between plastic and carbon fiber makes all the difference. Okay, so that's easy understood, but it's very difficult to make because if you reduce the amount of epoxy, then you run into the danger of the material coming apart. I can show you if you'd like. Now, I don't want to show you. Hundreds of sticks that we made, they're just falling apart because the lower you get the resin content, the more dangerous this whole project becomes. And you have to be very, very careful in how you manufacture your stuff. So, by the way, you also see snakewood here, which we use for our frogs, which is fantastic material for frogs, very resonant. Somewhere down here should be ebony. I don't know exactly where it is. So snakewood's actually a better resonant material than ebony, which we preferred for frogs. It also looks nice.
Yeah. So just to clarify, your
Yes.
CFRP, where it's the grey circle with the violin bow, the difference between that and your top left
Right.
CFRP is just the epoxy content. That's
Yeah, basically it's an epoxy content. It changes everything.
Hmm.
The closer together the fibers are, the stronger the whole compound is. In our bows, the epoxy has to do very little work. The higher the epoxy content, the more the plastic has a structural function because it has to transport the stress from one fiber to the other. If there's a significant amount of epoxy, it starts to flex and work, and that does the damping, and it also increases the elasticity, so reduces the stiffness. Yeah.
Great, great. And we've got another question from Janet, who was
Right.
just going back to where we started on this with Pernambuco, and just asking, are there no other places in the world that have got commercial Pernambuco
No,
plantations? And is that because of
that's
the slow growing time?
yeah. This tree is growing only in that climate. It is a very particular climate. It's warm and rather humid and mountainous, and you got to have special soil and whatnot. So that's really the only place where this tree is growing in the world. And plantations make no sense whatsoever because, as I've shown you, the real good wood is wood from trees that are 1,000 or 1,500 years old. When you start a plantation, what you get is fast growing, relatively light wood that's absolutely useless for bow making. They started plantations like 30 years or 40 years ago, I'm not quite sure. And then a couple of years ago, they chopped down a tree to see what it is, and it was completely useless. So no, that's not getting us anywhere.
Hmm.
So
Well,
all right,
I think I'm right in saying that in some clarinet making with the wood there, they're making a sort of composite product from the shavings and the leftover wood. Is that something that's been tried? Do you know, for bows?
I don't know.
No, I just wondered. I have a feeling that somebody else out there might know more than me on that one. I just have a feeling that I've heard that
But you
they're
know,
trying to reclaim the leftover wood.
my approach is this. If you look at playing on gut strings, by all means, use a wooden bow. Don't use a carbon bow for that. It makes no sense at all. But playing modern strings on a wood bow makes no sense either. It just can't do the job.
Mm.
And you will notice, I mean, when you play with an Arcus bow for a little longer period, and then you start to kind of relax your playing because everything is like in balance, and then you go back to a wooden bow and you think, oh goodness me, this is like soft, weak, difficult. But you only notice this once you've made the switch. Only, you've trained so hard to make do with an imperfect tool. But if that's what you have, you learn to do the best with it.
Yeah.
But from an engineer's perspective, it makes no sense.
Good. Do you want to stop sharing if unless you've got more slides? Oh, you've got more slides. Perfect.
Yeah.
Right.
I want to show you something. This is an
We like.
oscillation because we need to talk about damping. Now here, you see that?
Yep.
So this is this, up and down thing. And when instead of a steel spring, for example, you have a rubber spring or something with damping on it, this this oscillation will become weaker and weaker and smaller and smaller, like you've seen everywhere. And that is very, very important, of course, in musical instruments. And the problem with let me call it the first generation of carbon fiber bows with a relatively high epoxy content, is that it has a higher damping, and that is very it creates a lot of problem in the high frequency range. And that is because, of course, when you have a frequency like 10,000 hertz for an interesting overtone in the sound that you're trying to produce, 10,000 hertz means it's 10,000 oscillations per second. So that's very quick. And when you have a damping coefficient of, let's say, 1%, it means that the damping effect is really strong, and that the sound really doesn't ring out. And that's what a lot of people have noticed when you play with this, say again, first generation carbon fiber bow, you're missing these overtones. The sound is not really rich and brilliant, and it's always kind of dull. And we had to get away from that. So that was one of the reasons why we had to bring down the epoxy content to at least match Pernambuco. So that was the minimum that I wanted to go to. Yeah. Oh, here's a little thing. Just while I'm at it here, let's jump a little up and down. And I've been asked a million times regarding the bow hair. Why are we still using natural bow hair? Again, that is damping. Plastic fibers, like some people are promoting them for like vegan bow hair, have a huge problem with causing a lot of damping, so it dulls down the sound dramatically. Also, plastic doesn't bind the rosin, the colophony, as bow hair does. You can see on the left hand here, you can see this is a perfect bow hair, so it's perfectly clean. Where you see there's no
Sorry, Bernd,
hairs.
we're still on the spring at the moment.
You what?
We're still seeing the spring picture. Is there?
Oh, wait a minute. Let me. What is that? Okay, let me stop that. Close that. Close that. Okay.
Yeah, I tried one.
Sorry.
I tried one of the synthetic hairs on a bow of mine for a review for Arco a couple of years ago, and my biggest problem was getting rosin to work properly on it. You have to use a mix with some heavy double bass, very sticky double bass rosin, and it's not ideal.
No, it's not. So what might actually happen is that the rosin sticks more to the string than to the hair. It happened to me when I tried some synthetic hairs, and I had to switch bows in the middle of the rehearsal because it just became unplayable. Um, and so you see here on the left, you see the picture now with the bow
Yes.
hair?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. On the left hand, you see under a very strong microscope, you see a clean bow hair, and right on the right hand side was colophony, was rosin. So the hair is completely covered in rosin. And it doesn't matter at all if the hair has any structure, substructures. So when some bow makers tell you the hair is wearing out or anything, that it's not quite true. So what happens is that the rosin gets dirty. That's what happens. And dirty rosin don't hold the bow nice. So you can wash it out with alcohol, for example. So we do that a lot. Bassists always do that, by the way. So you clean away the dirty rosin, and you put on fresh rosin, and your grip is just perfect again. So bow hairs don't have hooks or anything on it. They're perfectly clean, straight. All right. So just wanted to share that with you. So okay, let me close that. So I should be back now.
There's a question which you might understand better than me here, Bernd.
Okay,
About I don't know if you can see that on the Q&A on the
oxidation.
chat. Yeah, oxidation or oxidating.
Yes. No. Yes. Yes. I think it's oxidating. What you get on the hair is extremely fine stuff. So the layer of rosin on the hair is so thin that what it can oxidate, it will oxidate. I think you may notice that effect when you put on fresh rosin on your bow. In the first couple of minutes, it feels a little different. It's got usually excellent grip, and then it loses a little bit of that, like 5-10 minutes later. That difference is not huge, but it's there. But when this question is about an old cake versus a new cake, no, won't make a difference because the oxidation happens on the bow.
Hmm.
Whether it's been a little bit oxidized before or in the cake really doesn't matter. So use your rosin as long as you like it, or buy a new one, whatever. It makes no difference. I've got a 15-year-old piece of rosin at home that just won't break or whatever. I still use it. It's as good as new. So
That's
no.
great, great. And there's a good question from Penny as well about you were mentioning earlier on about creating a mold for the bow. So if you've got a
Yes.
mold for a particular bow, are all the bows, she asked, are all the bows that come out of that mold going to be the same? Or could you check, could you use the same molds but do different mass distribution or whatever within that mold?
Absolutely, yes. So for the Arcus bows, every bow, let's for example look at the Valor bows. They usually consist of something like 6 layers of material. So on the outer side we have unidirectional fibers. So they are all, wait a minute, let's like here. So you see no structure. They are all just laid along. But if you look inside, so this is a cut up Arcus bow. You see there's the woven stuff, right? Like you can see on many other bows from the outside, right? And the woven material adds more mass, and the plain, so the a long material, the unidirectional stuff, that brings in most of the stiffness. So we can balance by changing the quantity of unidirectional fibers and wovens fibers, which we can change stiffness and mass to our liking. We also, in some bows, we put fiberglass because that adds mass. So yeah, we can put in a lot of different stuff into always the same mold and get out very, very different bows.
Great, great. Thank you. That's really interesting.
While I'm at this, I want to show you some more insides of oh yeah, let's start with the most ugly one. Let me okay.
For those watching live, we're just going to start wrapping this up fairly soon. But so do think if you've got questions, don't miss the chance to ask some more questions on the chat or the Q&A of Bernd, because he is being very happy to answer these questions, which is really helpful. Great.
So, you may have not seen this because, I mean, who's cutting up bows? Yeah, we do.
Be a new pastime.
Yeah, right. It's a lot of fun. So now guess what this is? This is the inside of a Chinese stick.
Ah.
Yeah, right. It looks pretty decent from the outside. When you cut it up, it looks really, really bad. Now imagine you're a sound wave and you're trying to get through that. You'll be thrown around quite badly. And this is why they sound junk. Look at this. This is the inside of a coda bow. It's also pretty interesting. You see pockets of resin. You see some interesting yellow stuff here, which I'm not perfectly sure whether that's Kevlar or anything else, some other plastic stuff. But you can see a lot of pockets here of resin, which you don't want to have in a bow because that's creating a lot of damping. Well, anyways, now let's look at this. Is a Müsing stick. So you see it's a very homogeneous woven structure. So the Müsing bows are all like that. They look exactly the same from the inside and the outside. It's just three layers of completely woven stuff, seamless. And it's a bit thicker. If you'll compare this to an Arcus bow, that's really, really thin. That's as thin as it gets. It's less than a millimeter wall thickness. It's also perfectly clean. As you can see, there's no pockets or anything of resin, and no fold-ups or whatever. Let's go back to the Chinese, to the American, the German Müsing bow, and the Arcus bow. And making this, I can tell you, that's a pain in the butt. And it took us years to figure it out. And I know of at least half a dozen companies who tried to copy that, and they all gave up in the process. So yeah, sorry.
You've mentioned Müsing bows and
yes,
bows, and tell us a little bit about the difference between those.
Right. Well, let's take a look. So that's on top you see the Müsing bow, below you see the Arcus bow. So we started in 1999 with production of the Arcus bows, and over the years we were able to improve them step by step, make them better and better and better, but we never managed to make them cheaper. They only got more expensive over time. Wages were rising and material costs were rising. Carbon fiber increased in price by 2 or 3 since we started. And so with Pernambuco being on the red list, it became clear that after like 2010 or so, that a lot of musicians out there will be stranded with the option between no supply of high quality wooden bows, so they had to make do with some very mediocre wooden bows, or with mediocre carbon bows, if you look at the medium price range or the lower price range. And I was really trying to figure out a way to make bows that are less expensive to manufacture than an Arcus bow, and still sound good and play well. And really, it took us altogether almost another 10 years to come up with this idea for a completely new process. So nobody's using this process to make a bow. Even if from the outside it may look a little similar to a Koda bow, to a Chinese bow, but from the inside, as you've seen, it's a completely different story. And just here, I mean, this is just to show you that it's not a made up picture or whatever. So this is a real stick, just cut open. That's exactly how we do it. So you can cut up any Müsing bow and it always look like that. An expensive hobby. Some guys do that in the computer business, right? Like take Apple iPhones apart and stuff. So you can do that with our bows. You will always find a bow that's perfectly clean inside and has a perfect fiber structure. As I said, it took us about 10 years from the first conceptual idea to really making them in a serial production now. So it is a very, very difficult process. The process may be even more difficult than how to make the Arcus bow. What we do is we start with dry cloth woven in like tubes. We put them all together, get them in the mold somehow, and then inject resin. And that process is near impossible. What you end up with is too much resin, too little resin, gaps and holes and breaking sticks. We've had trouble no end. I don't know how many hundred junk sticks we produced. I mean, it was a serious investment, and it cost us a lot of sweat. And we came to some really weird solutions. I would love to talk about that and explain everything, but it would take
time.
days.
And you wouldn't the sort of the Arcus Bow's blooper, really, where the things that went wrong.
Right. Yeah. Oh dear.
No, but I think it's great. It's great that you're obviously with those sort of things. You just have to persevere, don't you?
Yes. Yes, like in music, it's pretty much the same thing. You just don't stop. You play it wrong and you play it wrong again and again and again and every time in a different way. And you just keep going and then you see some light at the end of the tunnel and you keep pushing forward and then you find out, oh, wait a minute, that was just something, and so forth. But, just to make one thing clear, it's something that's in the air. I was not born sitting on a heap of carbon fiber that I had to make use of. It's quite the opposite round. I wanted to make a better bow and had to figure out how to do it, actually, and what materials to use and which process to develop. So it was a lot of pain, actually, to make that come true. And no, I'm not, born in a family of bow makers, so I didn't have to do that. But when I first understood that there's something substantially wrong in the bow and we might improve upon it and make it better, I just couldn't get rid of that idea. And it completely got me away from bicycles and all the other stuff I was doing. And it sucked me in. And here I am, still making bows.
I think it's great because it also sort of does link in with the change in perspective of violin making, instrument making as well, string instrument making. Modern makers now take a lot more seriously than they were 30 years ago, and I think there's a much more understanding that we need to look forward and find new ways of doing things. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think what you've told us about string changes, therefore driving a need for a change of bow, that's fascinating. And of course, the problem with Pernambuco is not one that can be solved in terms of the supply. Right. So we have to have these other options. And I think it's fantastic that you've spent so much time and effort trying to solve those problems and discover how these things work. And I've certainly learnt a load of stuff that I didn't know about bows today.
So let me just mention we have a YouTube channel where some people may have seen some of our videos. It's the same setting basically. I mean, it's the same spot right now. And so a lot of the stuff we've touched today, I go very much more in detail. Like, for example, the physics of the bow and the string and how it interacts. I've made a video about that. Also a video about like comparing wooden bows to carbon bows, you know, comparing the sound and all that. Or a video in which I explain the violin bows, the viola, the cello, and the bass bows. That's, you know, that's one more thing. I need to get rid of that real quick. Something I found out way into the process is that for every instrument, you have to think bow from the very beginning. It's very different. Every instrument, the bow hold is different. The forces are completely different. You know, the cello, you play the other way around and then the violin, and it doesn't like rest on the instrument, but it's like on a slide. And the whole physics really for every instrument is completely different. Viola and double bass I figured out last. Though I'm also a violist, it took me 15 years to really understand what's going on the viola. So we ended up making bows with different stiffnesses for smaller and larger violas, because the different string lengths gives us a different string tension, and thus we need a different elasticity in a bow. So every instrument has its very particular issues that you need to address if you want to make perfect bows, which is maybe one reason why certain bow makers are best known for only one type of bow. Like there's bow makers who have excelled in bass bows, other in violin bows, others in cello bows. So it took us many, many years to figure out for every instrument exactly what's needed and what's not. Like, for example, for violin, we need bows with very finely tuned sound. So a little bit brighter, a little bit darker can be terrible for a violin. On a double bass, forget it. It's really of no importance, which is why we make only one series of bass bows. In a bass bow, what we need is response. We need response, response, response. So what you need is to grab the string, and that's because that's so difficult on a bass bow. On a violin, response, yeah. Violinists know what response is, but it's not a key question, really not. But on a bass bow, it's everything. So it's a completely different challenge for a bow maker. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
thank you very much. I mean, I've put the YouTube channel link in the chat as well for people.
Excellent.
And we'll put those links when we put this recording of this webinar up on our channel. We will put the links there. And if people think of any questions, whether you're watching this live or whether you're watching it at a later date, if you've got any questions for Bernd, then you can either go through his site or you can come to us and we will pass the questions on. But we've sort of run out of time now, even though we started late. So thank you so much, Bernd. It's really fantastic, very interesting.
Thank you very much, Steve, for having me.
And thank you everybody who managed to get to hear this live. If you're watching it at a later date, apologies if you tried to get live and couldn't. We had some problems, and but we look forward to seeing you at the next ESTA webinars. We've got a series of these that go out quite regularly, and hopefully something for everyone. And I'm seeing in the comments there that people have found this one very interesting. So thanks again. And I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you again, Bernd, and see you all again another time.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.